She didn't run away. Let that sink in for a moment, because that detail, that single, agonizing detail, is what made this case haunt an entire nation for a decade. She didn't run away. There were no train tickets purchased, no friend she'd confided in, no diary entry talking about escape. She was 6 years old. She still believed in Santa Claus. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. Every window, every door, locked. The investigators checked. They double-checked. They triple-checked, because they had to be missing something. Children don't just evaporate from locked homes in the middle of the night. They don't just disappear from the safety of their own beds without leaving behind so much as a scuff mark on the carpet. And yet, on the morning of April 14th, 1990, in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Mill Haven, Ohio, Emily Carter was gone. Gone. From her bed. From her room. From her life. Her blanket was still warm when her mother, Linda Carter, reached down to touch it. That detail would torture Linda for years. The warmth. As if Emily had only just been there. As if she'd slipped out of existence so recently that the cotton hadn't even had time to cool. The police came. The neighbors came. The news vans came. And then the years came. Slowly, mercilessly, one after another, each one carrying less hope than the one before it. The case went cold. For 10 years, the world moved on. But Linda Carter did not. And then one gray November afternoon in the year 2000, she was sorting through old storage boxes in the basement. Boxes she hadn't touched since the investigation. Boxes she could barely bring herself to look at, when her hand closed around something plastic. Something bright yellow. Something with a red microphone and colorful buttons and a small silver speaker on the side. Emily's toy cassette recorder. Linda sat down on the cold cement floor. She turned it over in her hands. The batteries were long dead, but she had fresh ones somewhere. She found them. She loaded them in with shaking fingers. She pressed the small triangular play button, and what she heard next would reopen one of the most chilling child disappearance cases in Ohio history. What really happened to Emily Carter the night she vanished from her own bed? Because this case, from the very beginning, was never as simple as it seemed. To understand what happened to Emily Carter, you have to understand who Emily Carter was. Not just a victim, not just a case number, a person, a small, freckled, red-haired girl who woke up every morning with more energy than anyone in the house knew what to do with. Emily Margaret Carter was born on December 3rd, 1983, the only child of Linda and Robert Carter. Linda was a third-grade school teacher at Mill Haven Elementary, patient, warm, the kind of woman who kept a candy jar on her desk and remembered every student's birthday. Robert worked as a floor supervisor at the Halford manufacturing plant on the edge of town. Steady, dependable, a quiet man who expressed love through action rather than words. He built Emily a wooden playhouse in the backyard the summer she turned 4. He painted it yellow because yellow was her favorite color. Mill Haven, Ohio was the kind of town that didn't make the news. It had one stoplight, a diner called Patsy's that served the best blueberry pie in the county, a post office, a hardware store, and about 3,000 residents who all knew each other's names. Crime was virtually non-existent. People left their cars unlocked. Kids rode their bikes until dark. It was exactly the kind of place where a thing like this was never supposed to happen. The toy that never left her side. Emily had received the sing-along cassette recorder as a Christmas gift in 1988. She was 5 years old. It was bright yellow plastic with a red handheld microphone attached by a coiled yellow cord, and a row of chunky, colorful buttons across the top. It could record voice, play back recordings, and came with 3 blank cassette tapes. From the moment she unwrapped it, Emily was obsessed. She called it her radio station. She gave it a name, WEMY, a combination of her initials. She would sit cross-legged on her bedroom floor, hold the red microphone up to her lips with both hands, and conduct what she called her radio shows. She'd announce the weather. She'd interview her stuffed animals. She'd sing songs, sometimes ones she knew, sometimes one she invented on the spot about frogs, or cookies, or the color purple. Linda has said in interviews that she still can't hear a child singing without her heart seizing up. The toy went everywhere with Emily. To the grocery store, tucked under her arm. To Sunday dinners at Grandma Patrice's house on Elm Street. To her first and only day of kindergarten, where her teacher, Mrs. Doyle, had to gently explain that classroom rules meant the recorder had to stay in her backpack. Emily had negotiated. Could she record the morning announcements? Just the announcements. And Mrs. Doyle, charmed, had let her. That toy never left her side, Linda told investigators. It was like a security blanket, but louder. The night of April 13th. The evening of Saturday, April 13th, 1990 began like 100 other Saturday evenings in the Carter household. Robert had come home from his half shift at the plant just after 3 in the afternoon, smelling of machine oil and coffee. Linda had made pot roast with carrots and potatoes, Emily's favorite, and the three of them ate together at the kitchen table while the evening news murmured from the living room television. After dinner, Emily sat on the living room rug and watched cartoons. First her favorite, a show about a little bear who solved mysteries, then another program she'd seen before but liked anyway. Robert fell asleep in his armchair around 8. Linda graded papers at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside her. At 9 o'clock, Linda switched off the television, woke Robert, and called Emily for bed. Emily complained, as she always did. 5 more minutes. Just 5. Linda said no. Emily negotiated. Could she take her recorder to bed? She wanted to make one more recording before she slept. Linda said yes, as long as she kept the volume low and the microphone away from her mouth so it wouldn't pick up breathing sounds. Emily had tried to explain, once, that breathing sounds were important for radio ambience. Linda had not been convinced. Robert carried Emily up the stairs on his back. She was getting almost too big for that, but neither of them acknowledged it. Linda pulled back the covers. Emily climbed in, still holding the recorder. Robert kissed her forehead. Linda tucked the blanket up to her chin and kissed her cheek. "Good night, radio star," Linda said. Emily grinned. "Good night, Mom." Linda closed the bedroom door. She went back downstairs. She finished grading papers. She washed the dinner dishes. She and Robert watched the 10 o'clock news together. They went to bed. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. Nothing that, looking back, would have made either of them feel afraid. Nothing. Until morning. Linda Carter woke at 6:45 on Sunday morning, April 14th, 1990. It was earlier than she meant to sleep. She'd intended to be up by 7, but something had pulled her awake. She couldn't say what. A sound she didn't remember hearing. A shift in the air. Later, she would describe it in an interview as a feeling like the house was holding its breath. She lay in bed for a moment. Robert was still sleeping beside her. The birds were going outside. Everything sounded normal. She got up, put on her slippers, and went to check on Emily. The bedroom door was still closed, exactly as she'd left it. She pushed it open, already forming the word she'd used to gently wake her daughter. Rise and shine, radio star. Already imagining the sleepy protest, the little fists rubbing tired eyes. The bed was empty. Linda stood in the doorway for a long moment. The room was quiet. The curtains were still. The window was closed. The stuffed animals were arranged on the shelf exactly as they always were. The night light in the corner cast its small circle of warmth on the carpet. Everything was in its place. Everything except Emily. Emily. Her voice was strange, too quiet, too careful, as if she already knew something was wrong. No answer. She stepped into the room. She checked under the bed. Sometimes Emily built forts down there, dragging her blankets down to the floor and burrowing in. Nothing. She checked the closet. She checked the bathroom across the hall. She called Emily's name again. Louder now. Louder still. Robert appeared at the top of the stairs. What? What is it? She's not here. Linda's voice was flat now. Flat and terrible. Robert. She's not in her room. The search. They searched the whole house in under 3 minutes. They searched it again, slower, opening every closet, every cabinet, every space a small body could fit. They called her name until their throats ached. They went outside in the cold April morning in their pajamas and walked the backyard, the front yard, the driveway. They knocked on the door of their nearest neighbor, the Morrisons, and asked in shaking voices if anyone had seen Emily. The Morrisons had not. Robert called the police at 7:12 in the morning. He told the dispatcher his daughter was missing. He gave Emily's age, 6. He gave their address. The dispatcher told him to stay calm and that officers were on the way. Robert Carter, a man who had not cried in front of his wife in 11 years of marriage, sat down on the front porch step and put his face in his hands. The police arrived at 7:22. 2 officers first, young men, professional and careful, walking through the house with notebooks and measured expressions. Then more. Then a detective. What they found, or, more precisely, what they didn't find, began to shape the nightmare almost immediately. Every entry point to the house was secure. The front door deadbolt had been locked from the inside. The back door chain was still on. Every window in the house was locked, including, and this is critical, the window in Emily's own bedroom. The investigators examined the window frame carefully. No scratches on the sill. No indication that it had been forced or tampered with. The latch was old-fashioned, a simple lever mechanism that required a deliberate turn. It was fully in the closed position. There were no footprints in the soft garden soil below Emily's window. There was no sign of struggle anywhere in the house. There were no fingerprints on any surface that didn't belong there. And Emily Carter's cassette recorder was gone. It had been in the bed with her when Linda said goodnight. Now it was not in the house. And neither was Emily. Detective Frank Howell had been with the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department for 19 years when the Emily Carter case landed on his desk. He'd worked rural crime his whole career. Burglaries, the occasional domestic situation, a handful of fatal accidents on the 2-lane highways that connected the county's scattered towns. He'd worked one prior missing child case, a runaway teenager who'd turned up at her boyfriend's apartment in Columbus within 48 hours. Nothing in his career had prepared him for this. From the very first hour, Howell would later say, this case felt wrong. Not just sad. Wrong. Like the rules of the world didn't apply to it. The standard checklist for child disappearances began with the family. It always did, not out of cruelty, but out of statistical reality. In the majority of child abduction cases, the perpetrator is known to the victim. In a significant number, they are related. Detective Howell knew this. He followed protocol. Robert Carter under suspicion. Robert Carter spent 6 hours on April 14th being interviewed at the county sheriff's office. He submitted to a polygraph examination. He provided a detailed account of the previous evening, every meal and television program and conversation, all of which Linda confirmed independently. His alibi was his own wife, which Howell knew wasn't airtight, but every other piece of evidence pointed the same direction, toward nothing. Robert had no criminal history. He had no history of violence. Co-workers at the plant described him as quiet but fair. His neighbors on Millhaven Road respected him. Nobody had anything bad to say, and in a town of 3,000 people, that meant something. In a small town, everyone always knows. Still, Robert Carter lived under the shadow of suspicion for the better part of a year. That is simply what happens when a child disappears and there are no other leads. The father's name circulates in whispers. People look at him differently in the grocery store. He feels it. He always feels it. It destroyed him, quietly, in ways that would only become fully visible years later. The theories. Police considered 3 primary scenarios in the first weeks of the investigation. The first was stranger abduction. Someone had entered the house without leaving any trace of entry and had taken Emily without waking either of her parents. This was the scenario the public feared most and the one investigators found hardest to explain physically. The locked windows, the locked doors, the chain on the back door, a chain that required fingers, adult fingers, to slide open from the inside. How? The second theory was that Emily had sleepwalked out of the house. She had no history of sleepwalking, but her parents acknowledged it wasn't something they would necessarily have known about unless they'd witnessed it. A child could conceivably have unlocked a door in a semi-conscious state and wandered outside. A search of the surrounding fields, the woods at the edge of the development, the creek that ran behind the neighborhood, turned up nothing. No footprints, no clothing, nothing. The third theory was the one nobody wanted to say aloud: family involvement, an arranged disappearance, a death covered up. But the evidence, or complete lack of it, refused to support this theory either. The neighbor comes forward. It was 11 days after Emily's disappearance when Carl Briggs, who lived 2 houses east of the Carters on Millhaven Road, came forward. Briggs was 61 years old, a retired postal worker who lived alone and suffered from insomnia. He'd been sitting in his darkened living room on the night of April 13th, sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight. He couldn't be certain, when he heard something through his open window. A child's voice. Faint, distant, but unmistakably a child. He'd assumed at first it was a television in a neighbor's house. He didn't get up to look. He went back to his book. But it had struck him as odd, now that he thought about it. The voice had a quality to it. Not playing, not laughing, quiet and somehow purposeful, like the child was speaking carefully. There were no screams, no sounds of struggle, no car engine, just that faint, careful little voice, and then silence. Investigators spent days trying to determine what Carl Briggs had heard. Had it been Emily? Had she been awake at that hour, recording into her cassette toy, talking at a volume that drifted through a screen window into the spring night? Or had it been something else? And if it had been Emily, speaking quietly, purposefully, without fear, what did that mean about what was happening in that room? What happens next would reshape the entire investigation. But nobody would know it yet, because the tape was gone, and the case, that winter, went cold. By November of 1990, 7 months after Emily vanished, the active investigation had ground nearly to a halt. Howell's department had interviewed over 200 people. They'd distributed Emily's photo across 3 states. They'd followed up on nearly 60 tips called into the hotline, tips that had led, without exception, to dead ends. A cadaver dog sweep of the woods behind the neighborhood in June had found nothing. A second sweep in August had found nothing. The FBI field office in Columbus had reviewed the case file and assigned a liaison, an agent named Maria Vasquez, who worked the case diligently for 4 months before the demands of other active investigations pulled her attention away. What haunted Howell, what he thought about on the drive home, what kept him at his desk past midnight more times than he could count, was the cassette recorder. Everything else in Emily's room was there. Her stuffed animals, her books, her little plastic jewelry box with a spinning dancer. The recorder was the only thing missing, other than Emily herself. And you couldn't take a cassette recorder accidentally. You couldn't have it fall into your pocket. Someone had wanted it. Someone had deliberately taken it, which meant someone had known it was there, and possibly, known what was on it. The question of trust. As the investigation stalled, Howell's focus sharpened on a detail that had been bothering him from the first week. Carl Briggs's testimony about the child's voice. The specificity of it. Not playing. Not frightened. Careful. Children in the grip of a stranger. A true stranger. Someone they didn't know. Someone who had broken into their home. Did not speak carefully. They screamed. They cried. They called for their parents. The fact that Carl Briggs had heard nothing alarming from that direction was not reassuring. It was, in Howell's growing estimation, one of the most frightening details in the entire file. Because there was one scenario in which a 6-year-old child might leave her home in the middle of the night without screaming. If she trusted the person who came for her. If the person who came for her was someone she knew. Someone welcome. Someone familiar. Someone whose voice would have made her feel safe, even in the dark, even at an hour she shouldn't have been awake. Someone she would have followed without question, whispering because she'd been told to whisper, the way children follow instructions from adults they trust. Howell compiled a list of people who had regular access to the Carter home. Extended family. Robert's co-workers who had been to the house. Neighbors. Parents of Emily's kindergarten classmates. Linda's fellow teachers. The plumber who'd come to fix a leak in the bathroom 3 weeks before Emily disappeared. The mail carrier. It was a long list. And with no physical evidence, no forensic leads, no witnesses, and no confirmed sighting of Emily after the night of April 13th, there was nothing Howell could do except keep the list and wait. He waited. 1 year became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 10. The list sat in a manila folder in a filing cabinet in the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department. Emily Carter remained a missing person, and the case went from active to cold to something that lived in a filing cabinet and in the memory of one detective who refused, even as the years accumulated, to let himself forget a little girl's name. Grief. When it is the grief of a parent who has lost a child without explanation, without a body, without an answer, that kind of grief does not process. It does not move through stages and arrive at acceptance. It pools. It sits. It becomes the air in the house, the temperature of every room, the sound of silence at dinner. Linda Carter continued teaching 3rd grade. She showed up every morning. She put candy in the jar on her desk. She remembered birthdays. Her students never would have known, looking at her, the weight she carried into that classroom with her every day. She had made herself into someone who could function, and she was very, very good at it. But she went home every evening to a house that had Emily's bedroom at the end of the hall. She had not changed it. The stuffed animals were still on the shelf. The curtains were still yellow because yellow had been Emily's favorite color. The nightlight still burned in the corner. Linda changed the bulb whenever it went out. She had a drawer full of replacements. She had never once considered that Emily might not come back. Or rather, she had considered it. She was not naive, and she was not, ultimately, a person who could deny reality for long. But she had decided that believing Emily was still alive was the only way she could continue to exist. So she believed it. She maintained the room. She kept the nightlight on. Robert leaves. Robert Carter left in 1994, 4 years after Emily disappeared. The marriage that had survived the investigation, the suspicion, the accusations, and the grief finally could not survive the distance that had grown between two people who grieved completely differently. Linda grieved openly, with photographs and candlelight vigils and conversations with Detective Howell that she initiated at least once a month for years. Robert went inward, further and further, until there was almost nothing left on the surface. He stopped talking about Emily. Not because he had forgotten her. Linda would say later, in an interview, that she genuinely believed Robert thought about Emily every moment of every day until the day he died. But because he could not speak her name without shattering, and he refused, stubbornly, to shatter, he moved to a town called Greer, about 40 miles away. He called Linda on Emily's birthday every year, December 3rd, and they would speak for a few minutes, quietly, and then hang up, and Linda would sit in Emily's room for a while after. She never blamed him for leaving. She understood. The first day of the new millennium, the year 2000 arrived. There were fireworks in Millhaven, small ones, the kind that looked like flowers opening in the dark. Linda watched them from her backyard, holding a glass of wine she had barely touched. 10 years. Emily would have been 16 years old. She would have been a teenager, with opinions about music and complicated feelings about boys and a bedroom that perhaps would have been decorated differently by now. Maybe she'd have taken down the yellow curtains and put up something more grown-up. Linda had been thinking about that a lot lately. How old Emily would be. What she might be doing. What she might have become. In early November of 2000, Linda decided she needed to clean out the basement storage room. She had been putting it off for years. It was full of boxes from before, boxes from the investigation, boxes of Robert's things he'd never come to collect, Boxes of Emily's overflow items that had been moved down there during the search to make room for the investigators to work. She put on an old sweater. She went downstairs. She started with the boxes nearest the door. She worked for 2 hours. Her back ached. She was about to stop when she saw the box in the corner, a plain cardboard box, flaps folded shut, labeled in Robert's handwriting, Emily, Misk. She had known it was there. She had been circling it for 2 hours. She went to it. She sat down on the cement floor. She opened the flaps. Inside, a pair of red rubber rain boots. A crayon drawing of what appeared to be the family dog. Though they'd never owned a dog, Emily had wanted one. A McDonald's Happy Meal toy. A small plastic tiara from a birthday party. And at the bottom, under everything else, its yellow plastic still bright despite the years. Its red microphone still attached by that coiled yellow cord. The cassette recorder. Linda did not understand, at first, how it could be there. She had been told, 10 years ago, that it was gone. The investigators had noted its absence. It was on the list of missing items. It had been missing. But here it was. In a box. In her basement. Later, much later, it would be determined that the recorder had been in the room during the initial search, tucked between the mattress and the wall, missed in the chaos of the first hours, subsequently packed up by a well-meaning relative who had helped clear the room for the investigation, placed in the box without realizing its significance, and stored. For 10 years, the recorder had sat in a cardboard box in a corner of a basement in Millhaven, Ohio. Linda held it in her hands. Her fingers were shaking. She found 4 AA batteries in a kitchen drawer upstairs. She loaded them in. She sat back down on the basement floor. She pressed play. The first thing Linda heard was static, a long wash of it, the kind that a cassette tape accumulates over years of sitting unplayed. Then a high, clear, unmistakable sound that made her press both hands over her mouth. Emily's voice. Good evening, and welcome to WEMY Radio. This is your host, Emily Carter, coming to you live from my bedroom, which smells like pot roast. Linda Carter, sitting on a cold cement floor in November 2000, began to cry. Not quietly, not politely. She wept the way people weep when a wound that has been numb for years is suddenly, without warning, restored to full sensation. She heard her daughter's voice. The voice that had been silent for 10 years. The voice she had spent 10 years afraid she was beginning to forget. She had not forgotten it. Not a single note of it. It was exactly as she remembered. What the tape held. The cassette contained multiple recordings, clearly made over a period of time. Emily's radio shows. Her interviews with stuffed animals. A recording of what appeared to be her attempting to teach her toy rabbit how to count to 10. A song about a caterpillar that went on for 4.5 minutes and changed key approximately 9 times. Linda listened to all of it. She didn't move. An hour passed. Maybe more. And then, near the end of the tape, after a long stretch of blank hiss, something changed. The quality of the sound shifted. This wasn't a radio show. This wasn't Emily performing for an imaginary audience. The recording sounded different. The microphone close. The voice hushed. Like Emily had been recording quietly, carefully, not wanting to be heard. Emily's voice, very low. This is a special report from WEMY Radio. It's very late. I'm supposed to be asleep. A pause. Then a sound that made Linda's blood stop moving through her veins. Another voice. Not Emily's. Deeper. Coming from somewhere close to the microphone. Close, but perhaps not aware that the recorder was running. Or perhaps not caring. Male. Adult. Calm. The kind of calm that is controlled, deliberate, practiced. It's okay, Emily. Don't make a sound. Then silence. A long silence. And then the soft sound of what might have been movement, fabric, maybe footsteps. And the recording ended. The tape ran out. Static. Then nothing. Linda Carter sat on her basement floor and listened to the static for a very long time. Then she picked up the phone and called Detective Howell. He answered on the second ring. He always answered quickly when he saw her number. "Frank," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I found the recorder. There's something on it. There's a man's voice, Frank. On the tape. In her room. That night. I heard him." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a moment. "Don't touch anything else," Howell said. "I'm on my way." Frank Howell arrived at Linda Carter's house on Millhaven Road at 9:47 in the evening. He brought with him Detective Sandra Price, who had joined the department in 1997 and had been briefed on the Carter case as part of her orientation. It was, Howell had explained to her then, the case he would never fully close. He sat in Linda's kitchen and listened to the tape. He listened to it 3 times. He didn't speak during any of the playbacks. Sandra stood near the counter with her arms folded and her jaw set in that particular way that Howell had come to recognize as her attempt to maintain professional composure when something genuinely disturbed her. After the 3rd playback, he took the recorder. He handled it by the edges, though fingerprints after a decade were unlikely to yield much. He labeled it and bagged it and told Linda he would be in touch. What he did not tell her, sitting in her kitchen that night, was what he already suspected. He had been carrying that suspicion, or some early shadow of it, for a long time. But suspicion without evidence is nothing. And he had learned, over 19 years in law enforcement, to say nothing until he had something to say. The lab. The tape was sent to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation Audio Forensics Laboratory. The analyst assigned to the case, a specialist named Dr. Patricia Okafor, worked with it for 3 weeks. She cleaned the audio signal, removed the tape hiss, isolated the 2 voices, and enhanced the male voice using software that had not existed 10 years earlier. She produced a clear audio profile of the voice. Adult male. Estimated age range, late 30s to early 50s. No strong regional accent, suggesting either a native of the Midwest or someone who had lived there long enough to neutralize other patterns. The tone was controlled. Dr. Okafor noted in her report that the voice showed no markers of agitation or fear. It was the voice of someone who was comfortable in that situation. Someone who had been in that situation before, or had prepared for it. The words themselves. "It's okay, Emily." Not "calm down." Not "sure." "It's okay, Emily." The use of her name. Specific, personal, familiar. "And don't make a sound." Not "you'll wake your parents." Not "it's late." "Don't make a sound." Directive. Practiced. The voice of someone who knew that sounds, in this situation, could cause problems. The list. Howell went back to the manila folder. The list of people who had regular or occasional access to the Carter home. He had 19 names on it. Some of those people had moved. Some had died. Some were women and could be immediately ruled out based on the voice profile. He was left with 11 male names. He began making calls. He worked through the list systematically over the course of 2 months. Most of the men cooperated willingly. They were shocked to hear the case had reopened, expressed condolences, answered questions calmly. Howell's instincts, refined over decades, told him nothing about most of them. They were what they appeared to be, ordinary men who had known the Carter family at some point and had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance. But there was one name on the list that had been there from the beginning, a name that Howell had never been able to fully release from his consideration, even in the years when the file sat untouched. Dennis Ware. Dennis Ware had been 38 years old in April of 1990. He was Robert Carter's co-worker at the Halford plant. They'd worked together for 6 years, played on the same softball team, occasionally socialized. He had been to the Carter house on at least 9 documented occasions that the family could remember. Cookouts, Robert's birthday one year, a couple of card games on Friday nights when Linda was at a teacher's conference. Emily had known Dennis Ware. He'd been to her birthday party the previous December. She'd turned 6. Linda remembered that Emily had shown in the cassette recorder her new Christmas gift. She'd done a little recording demonstration. Dennis had laughed and called it the most impressive radio station in Ohio. He'd known about the recorder. Howell had interviewed Ware in 1990. He'd cooperated fully, expressed shock and concern, provided an alibi for the night of April 13th. He said he'd been home alone, watching television. His then-girlfriend, a woman named Carla Sims, confirmed she'd spoken to him by phone that night around 10:30. Not exactly a watertight alibi. Ware had moved out of Millhaven County in 1993. He was living now, in the year 2000, in a suburb outside of Dayton. He still worked at a manufacturing plant. He had never married. Howell picked up the phone. The interview. Dennis Ware agreed to meet with Howell and Price in person. He drove to the Millhaven County Sheriff's Office on a Thursday in February 2001. He arrived on time. He was polite. He wore a gray sweater and carried a paper cup of coffee from a gas station. He shook hands with both detectives. He said he was glad someone was still working on it. The interview began as a conversation. Howell was good at conversations. He could make almost anyone feel like they were simply catching up over coffee. He asked about Ware's job, his daily routine, whether he kept in touch with anyone from the old Halford days. Then Howell set a document on the table, an enhanced transcript of the audio from the tape. He placed it face up so Ware could read it. "We recovered a recording from the night Emily disappeared," Howell said, his voice easy and conversational. "A man's voice on the tape. We've had it analyzed." Dennis Ware looked at the transcript. His eyes moved across the words. His face, and Price, who was watching closely, would note this in her report, showed something very carefully controlled. Not surprise. She had expected surprise. People who were innocent showed surprise. Ware showed something else. A kind of stillness. The stillness of someone who has just recognized a thing they have spent years hoping would not find them. "These are not your words?" Howell asked. "No," said Dennis Ware. "You were never in Emily Carter's bedroom on the night of April 13th, 1990. No. You never spoke to her that night. You never told her it was okay, and not to make a sound. No." His voice was very level. His hands were flat on the table. Howell watched them. They were still, too still, the kind of stillness that requires effort. The interview lasted 3 hours. Ware did not confess. He did not break. He was, Howell would later say with a kind of grudging professional acknowledgement, extremely composed. But by the end of those 3 hours, Howell knew, with the bone-deep certainty that came from decades of sitting across tables from people who were lying to him, that he was looking at the man who had taken Emily Carter. The voice match. The audio analysis process for voice identification in 2001 was more art than science. Forensic voice analysis was not yet the standardized discipline it would become. But Dr. Okafor, working with 2 additional forensic audio specialists brought in from separate institutions, produced a comparative analysis between the voice on the tape and a controlled recording of Dennis Ware reading a prepared text. The findings were carefully worded. Forensic voice comparison could not claim the same certainty as DNA or fingerprints. But the analysis identified a series of consistent characteristics: vocal frequency range, articulation patterns, a specific quality in the S sounds that was distinctive. The conclusion: the voice on Emily Carter's cassette recorder was consistent with the voice of Dennis Ware. Consistent with 2 carefully chosen words. Not a confession, not a conviction, but enough. Enough to obtain a warrant. Enough to search. The search. In March 2001, investigators executed a search warrant on Dennis Ware's home in the suburb outside Dayton. They spent 2 days going through the property. In a locked metal storage box in the attic, wrapped in an old flannel shirt, they found a cassette tape. The tape was not labeled. When it was played at the forensic lab, it contained recordings, children's voices, multiple recordings, none of them identified as Emily. The discovery widened the investigation immediately and catastrophically. This was not, apparently, a single, isolated crime. Investigators also found, in the same storage box, a collection of photographs that would take weeks to fully analyze. And among other items, a child's small red rubber rain boot. A single boot, left foot, size 6. The boot was identified by Linda Carter from a photograph. It was Emily's. She had on a pair of red rain boots. The boot had been missing from the day Emily disappeared. Nobody had noticed its absence, amid everything else. Dennis Ware was arrested on March 14, 2001. He was charged initially with evidence related to the items found in his home. The Emily Carter case was reopened officially as a homicide investigation. Emily was never found. Dennis Ware was ultimately convicted in 2003, after a trial that lasted 6 weeks and drew national media attention. He was convicted on multiple counts related to the crimes evidenced by the materials found in his attic, crimes involving children other than Emily, crimes for which there were victims who were still alive and able to testify. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He never confessed to taking Emily Carter. He maintained, through his arrest, his trial, and every year of his incarceration, that he had no involvement in her disappearance. His lawyers argued the voice analysis was inconclusive, the rain boot circumstantial, the evidence insufficient for the specific charge of abducting Emily. The jury, having heard the full scope of what Dennis Ware had done, and having listened to the enhanced audio of a grown man whispering to a 6-year-old girl in the dark of a bedroom, chose to believe he was lying. So did Frank Howell. So did Sandra Price. So did Linda Carter. Linda Carter retired from teaching in 2008. She still lives in Millhaven. She still keeps the nightlight on in Emily's room, though she has allowed herself, over the years, to make small changes. She put a different bedspread on. She let a friend donate the furniture to Goodwill and replaced it with a small reading chair and a bookshelf. She kept the stuffed animals. She has spoken publicly about the case on several occasions, to journalists, to advocates for missing children, once at a conference for law enforcement professionals on the value of physical evidence preservation. In every interview, she has been composed and direct and devastating. She has said that she does not know, with certainty, what happened to Emily. She has said that she believes she will not know in this lifetime. She has said that she has had to make peace with not knowing, because the alternative of spending whatever years she has left consumed entirely by grief that will never resolve, felt to her like a second loss. And she had already lost enough. She has said, most quietly and most devastatingly, that she is grateful for the tape. That hearing Emily's voice, the radio show, the Caterpillar song, the announcement from WEMY that it smelled like pot roast, gave her something back. Not Emily. Nothing could give her Emily, but a piece of her. A real, recorded, present-tense piece of who Emily was, preserved in plastic and magnetic tape, waiting in a box for a decade to be heard again. I'm glad she didn't know what was happening, Linda said, in one of her last public interviews. I'm glad that when she pressed record that night, she was still herself, still my radio star. Whatever happened after, whatever he did, that tape is before, and that's what I hold on to. The before. Frank Howell. Frank Howell retired from the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department in 2004, 2 years after Ware's conviction. He lives in the same town. He and Linda Carter still have coffee together sometimes, on Saturdays, at Pat's Diner. They don't always talk about Emily. They talk about their gardens, their grandchildren, the news. But sometimes they do talk about her, and when they do, they don't look away from it. They've learned, both of them, not to look away. Howell has said he is at peace with the resolution, if a case with no recovered child and no confession can be called resolved. He did not find Emily. He never stopped trying. He found her voice, preserved on magnetic tape in a toy recorder, and that voice, combined with a rain boot and an unlabeled cassette and 11 weeks of careful, relentless investigative work, put the man he believed had taken her in a cell where he would remain for the rest of his life. You work these cases and you want a different ending, Howell has said. You always want a different ending. But sometimes the only justice available is the kind you have to be willing to accept, even when it isn't enough. Because doing nothing, giving up, that isn't an option I was ever willing to take. The tape, Emily Carter's sing-along cassette recorder, bright yellow, with a red microphone and a row of colorful buttons, is currently held in evidence storage by the Millhaven County Sheriff's Department. A copy of the audio was made at Linda's request. She keeps it on a shelf in Emily's room, next to the stuffed animals. She has never pressed play on the copy. She doesn't need to. She has heard it enough times now that she can replay it in her mind, perfectly, without distortion, every note of Emily's voice singing about a caterpillar, every word of the WEMY weather forecast, the crinkle of the blanket, the hiss of the tape. And after all of that, after the singing and the laughter and the small, ordinary, precious evidence of a 6-year-old girl who was loved and happy and completely, absolutely herself, the silence, and the voice, and then more silence, and then the sound of a mother, 10 years later, sitting on a cold cement floor, finally hearing what had been there all along, waiting to be found, waiting to be heard, waiting the way the truth always waits, quietly and without apology, for someone who is willing to listen. For 10 years, the truth sat hidden inside a child's toy. Sometimes the answers aren't lost. They are just waiting to be heard.